There's a specific horror in discovering that the most dangerous person in your community has been standing behind a counter, handing you bread, smiling at your children, and being considered a good man. This is the horror of Robert Hansen. Robert Christian Hansen was born February 15, 1939 in Esterville, Iowa. His father was a Danish immigrant who owned a bakery and ran it with the discipline of a man who confused severity with love. The boy worked before school, after school, and on weekends. He was small, he stuttered. His face was ravaged by acne so severe that classmates refused to be near him. He asked girls out and was rejected over and over in ways that small towns make worse through repetition and audience. Every refusal was public, every humiliation echoed. He found solace in hunting. In the woods, alone with a rifle, the social calculus that made him nothing in human company did not apply. He was patient, he was skilled, he could track, he could wait. He understood terrain and movement and the particular vulnerability of prey that doesn't know it's being watched. In the woods, Robert Hansen was in control in a way he was never in control anywhere else. He moved to Alaska in 1967, Anchorage, a city being built in real time, rough at the edges, full of men who had come north for oil money and opportunity and were spending it on everything a boomtown offers. Hansen opened a bakery, he married, he had 2 children. He hunted constantly, entering competitions, winning trophies, and earning coverage in local newspapers. He set records, he was respected. He was also, by this point, already a rapist. The first documented assaults were in Iowa, before Alaska, before the bakery, before the family. They were prosecuted lightly because the legal frameworks of the 1960s were not built to take sexual violence seriously, and because Hansen was articulate and had a stutter and looked harmless, and the women he attacked were not the kind of women the system protected with any particular vigor. In Alaska, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline changed everything. 800 miles of infrastructure, built through some of the most remote terrain on Earth, required a workforce of tens of thousands. They came from everywhere. Anchorage swelled. And with the workforce came everything that follows money in isolation: bars, strip clubs, women who had traveled north for the same economic reason the men had, and who existed in the city's underground economy with the specific vulnerability of people who have no official presence, whose disappearances would not generate official concern, who would not be missed in the ways that generate investigation. Robert Hansen began hunting them. His method was this: he would select a woman, offer her money, and drive her to his home. In his basement, behind a hidden wall panel, was a soundproofed room. He would bring her there, he would do what he did there. And then, and this is the part that separates Hansen from other killers in a way that is not merely factual, but is something the mind keeps returning to, keeps trying to understand, keeps failing to contain, he would take her to his plane. He owned a Piper Super Cub, a small bush plane, the kind used routinely in Alaska for accessing remote terrain. He had his pilot's license. He knew the wilderness north of Anchorage in the specific navigational detail of someone who had hunted it for years. He would fly his victim out into the Matanuska Valley, the Nick River area, the remote country that expanded in every direction from Anchorage without road or trail or any human presence for miles. He would land. He would let her out of the plane. He would give her a head start. Then he would hunt her. Armed with a Ruger Mini 14 rifle and hunting knives, Robert Hansen would pursue women through the Alaskan wilderness the way he had pursued game for decades. They were disoriented, they were terrified, they did not know the terrain, they did not know in which direction safety lay. The temperature in the Alaskan bush in the months Hansen preferred to operate ranged from cold to lethal. Some of them ran, some of them hid. Some of them perhaps tried to reason with him when he found them. He buried them where they fell, in shallow graves, and marked each location with an X on a topographic aviation map that he kept hidden in the headboard of his bed. Over 12 years, from approximately 1971 to 1983, Robert Hansen killed at least 17 women this way. He raped at least 30 others who survived. Most of his victims were never reported missing because they were exactly the kind of women whose absences the city did not track. The wilderness north of Anchorage is vast and deep and cold, and keeps its secrets with absolute indifference to human urgency. The police had encountered Hansen before. He had been arrested for assault with a dangerous weapon. He had been arrested for larceny. He had appeared on the radar of law enforcement. Cement in ways that, in retrospect, formed a pattern that should have been recognizable. A judge later said in court, with the specific rueful quality of institutional failure, "This gentleman here has been known to us for several years." We've turned him loose several times." They kept turning him loose, he kept hunting. The break came in June of 1983. A 17-year-old woman, I will call her by the name she later chose to go by publicly, Cindy Paulson, had been working in Anchorage. Hansen approached her, offered her money, handcuffed her, and took her to his house. He brought her to the basement. He did what he did in the basement. Then he loaded her into his car to drive to the airport, to his plane, to the wilderness. At the airport, in a moment of opportunity that lasted seconds, Cindy Paulson ran. She ran to a passing truck. She flagged it down. She was handcuffed, still on, barefoot, on the side of a road in Anchorage at 4 in the morning, and she survived because she ran in the right direction at the right moment, and a stranger stopped. She went to the police. She told them everything she could remember: the man's face, his car, his plane, his house. She described the soundproofed room in the basement. She described being handcuffed to a post while he did what he did. The police did not believe her. They investigated Hansen's alibi. 2 of his friends confirmed he had been with them the night of the abduction. The case appeared to be Cindy Paulson's word against a respectable family man who ran the bakery where the cops got their coffee and donuts. They dropped it. But Alaska State Trooper Glenn Flood did not drop it. An FBI agent, John Douglas, brought in to profile the unknown killer whose victims had been turning up in the wilderness north of Anchorage for years, produced a profile that matched Hansen point by point: low self-esteem, probable speech impediment, probable history of public rejection, avid hunter, someone who experienced the killing as the exercise of control he had been denied throughout his life. Flood went back to Hansen's friends. He pressed them. The alibi cracked. The friends admitted they had lied. A search warrant was obtained. In Hansen's home, they found jewelry belonging to several missing women, a rifle that matched bullet casings found at murder scenes, and in the headboard of the bed where Robert Hansen slept next to his wife every night, they found the map. The aviation map of the country north of Anchorage, with dozens of X marks. Each one is a woman in the ground. Hansen was confronted with the map in the interrogation room. The assistant district attorney later described watching him. His face went red, the hair on the back of his neck stood up, and something happened that Rothschild called a transformation, a visible moment in which the careful architecture of the normal man crumbled, and whatever was underneath became briefly, horribly visible. He confessed 17 murders, 30 rapes, 12 years. He agreed to fly with investigators over the wilderness north of Anchorage and point out where he had buried the women. They flew in his bush plane, the same plane he had used to transport them to their deaths. He pointed, they marked. In the spring thaw, the bodies came up from the ground. 12 have been found, 11 identified. One woman, known only as Ekletna Annie, remained unidentified for decades. She was finally identified through DNA genealogy in 2021, 61 years after Robert Hansen shot her in the Alaskan wilderness and left her in a shallow grave and marked her location with an X and went home to his bakery and his family and his trophies on the wall. He died in prison in 2014, serving 461 years plus life. I think about the map, I think about it often. The way it represents the intersection of 2 things that should not be intersectable: the precision of the hunter's record-keeping and the specific reality of what each mark means. Each X was a person. Each X was a moment in the wilderness when someone ran and was caught. Each X was the end of something that had been a life. And the map was on his headboard. His wife slept 2 feet from it every night. She did not know what it was. I think about what it means that the most important document in the history of those murders, the document that gave the dead their locations back, that allowed the earth to give up what it had been keeping, was hidden not in a bank vault or a distant storage facility, but in the furniture of the bedroom of the man's home, close enough to touch, present in the most intimate space of his daily life. He slept next to the map of the women he had killed. Every night, for 12 years. I am going to tell you the story of Cindy James. And I am going to tell you both possible versions of it, because this case has 2 versions. The reason it keeps people awake at night is not that we don't know which version is true. It is that we cannot decide which version is more frightening. Cindy James was a registered nurse who lived in Richmond, British Columbia, a suburb of Vancouver. She was 44 years old in 1989, which is when her body was found in the yard of an abandoned house near her home. She had been drugged, she had been strangled. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back in a configuration called a hogtie, her wrists and ankles secured together with nylon cord, her body positioned so that any movement would only tighten the restraints. The official position of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police was that Cindy James had killed herself. Cindy's family said this was impossible. They had watched her suffer for 7 years. They had been there for nearly 100 separate incidents of harassment, assault, and terror. They had sat with her in emergency rooms. They had helped her move to new addresses. They had watched her change her name, change her car, change everything that could be changed, while something found her again and again and again. In October of 1982, 4 months after separating from her husband, Roy Makepeace, Cindy James began receiving phone calls. The first calls were silent. The caller would stay on the line, breathing, saying nothing, for long enough to establish that the silence was not accidental. Then they began to speak. The content of the calls was violent and sexual and specific in ways that suggested the caller knew things about Cindy's life that a stranger should not know. The calls came at all hours. They continued every day. Then the physical intrusions began. A rock through the back door window. No theft, nothing taken, just entry demonstrated. Shortly after, a note was left in the house. Then another note. The notes were threatening in language that seemed designed to establish maximum terror with minimum specificity, the terror of knowing someone is watching without knowing who or why or when. Dead cats appeared in her yard, one with a rope around its neck, a note underneath, "You're next." 3 strangled kittens, found bound with rope in her garden over a period of 2 months. A jar of urine on her front porch, a jar of feces, an unlit Molotov cocktail on her rear porch, hair and firecrackers in her mailbox. Cindy moved. She changed the color of her car. She changed her last name. She hired a private investigator, Ozzy Cabin, who would stay on her case for the next 6 years and who would ultimately tell reporters that he understood why authorities doubted her, but that he himself had never stopped believing her. The harassment followed her to the new address. She installed a portable emergency alarm. She carried pepper spray. She carried oil. She wore a medical alert button at all times. She did every practical thing available to a person who is being systematically targeted. The stalker followed her to her workplace. Notes were delivered there. A butcher knife appeared at her office. Phone calls came to the children's preschool where she worked as an administrator. The RCMP mounted the most expensive single investigation in British Columbia history. Over $1.5 million Canadian dollars, 80 officers at various points, 14 officers maintaining 24-hour surveillance at her home during extended periods. And during every period of active police surveillance, in the times when officers were physically present, watching the property, nothing happened. Every incident occurred when the surveillance was not in place. It was as if the stalker knew when the police were watching. In July 1982, Cindy was reported missing. She was found hours later, unconscious, injured, her memory of the incident fragmentary. In another incident, she was found on her living room floor, a knife driven through her hand, pinning her hand to the floor. Beneath the blade was a note. When she regained consciousness, she said a man had struck her from behind and injected her with something. A needle mark was confirmed. No drug was found in her system. She was attacked while walking her dog. She was found with ligature marks on her neck. She reported being abducted by a car. In July 1979, and here I am describing the Cindy James case now as she described it, and I will tell you shortly why the distinction matters. She was dragged into a car and stabbed 3 times with an ice pick before escaping. She was hospitalized with 3 stab wounds. The RCMP spent years trying to find her attacker and found nothing. No fingerprints at any scene, no witnesses to any incident. No physical evidence that anyone other than Cindy had been present at any of the locations where things had happened to her. Nothing. By the mid-1980s, the RCMP developed a theory. Their theory was that Cindy James was doing this to herself. Not consciously or perhaps consciously, they were not certain, but the physical evidence pointed only to her. The incidents occurred only when surveillance was not in place. The wounds, while real, were consistent with self-infliction. The needle mark with no associated drug could be a needle mark from a needle containing nothing. The animals found dead in her yard had been killed by methods physically accessible to her. They believed she was either creating a fictional stalker for psychological reasons they could not fully access, or that she was in a dissociative state when the incidents occurred and had no conscious memory of causing them. Her family believed this was obscene. She had 3 stab wounds. She had a knife in her hand. She had been found unconscious multiple times in states that medical personnel confirmed were consistent with assault and drug administration. Her family believed a killer was walking free because the police had decided it was easier to disbelieve the victim. In May of 1989, Cindy James disappeared. Her car was found abandoned. Personal items were scattered around it, blood on the driver's side door. 2 weeks later, her body was found in the yard of an abandoned house approximately 1.5 kilometers from the car. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back, strangled, drugged. This time, the drug was confirmed in her system. A lethal dose of a combination of morphine, flurazepam, and haloperidol. The RCMP concluded she had administered the drugs to herself, tied her own hands and feet behind her back, and died. The coroner's inquest, after hearing more than 80 witnesses over months of testimony, returned a verdict of death by an unknown event, not suicide, not murder, unknown. Cindy James's death has never been officially solved. Now I want to tell you the 2 versions of this story and why both of them are unbearable. Version 1, Cindy James was stalked for 7 years by someone who was never identified, who evaded one of the most expensive and extensive police investigations in Canadian history, who knew when surveillance was active and planned accordingly, and who ultimately kidnapped her, drugged her, bound her in a position of maximum helplessness, and left her to die. She spent 7 years living in terror of something real, and the people who were supposed to protect her decided instead that she was lying, and a killer walked free. Version 2, Cindy James was not being stalked. Something within Cindy James, something she could not control and may not have been aware of, was generating the terror she was experiencing. She stabbed herself 3 times. She drove a knife through her own hand. She killed animals in her own yard and left them for herself to find. And at the end, in whatever state that part of her existed in, she administered a fatal drug combination, tied her own hands and feet behind her back, and lay down in the yard of an abandoned house and died. In version 1, the monster was outside. In version 2, the monster was inside. I want you to sit with the fact that there is no third version. One of these 2 things happened. We do not know which one. And I genuinely cannot tell you which one is more frightening. Some cases do not resolve. They simply end, or rather, they stop producing new information while continuing to produce the specific, low-grade horror of a question that cannot be answered and will not be forgotten. They become part of a place, part of a culture's understanding of what the darkness contains. Lake Bodom has been that for Finland since 1960. On the evening of Saturday, June 4, 1960, 4 teenagers traveled to the shore of Lake Bodom, a glacial lake approximately 20 kilometers west of Helsinki, near the city of Espoo. The campsite was well-known, scenic, the kind of place that teenagers used in summer. 2 couples, Mela Ermeli Björklund, 15, and her boyfriend Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, 18. Anya Tulikimäki, 15, and her boyfriend Seppo Entiro Boisman, also 18. They pitched a single tent on the lake shore. The afternoon was ordinary. They ate, they talked, they did what teenagers do on summer evenings. At approximately 10:30 p.m., they went to bed. What happened between 10:30 p.m. and the moment their campsite was discovered the following morning has never been fully established. What is known is the result. Sometime between 4 and 6 a.m. on Sunday, June 5, 1960, something came to their tent. It did not announce itself, it did not hesitate. It came to the tent, and it attacked with ferocity that the forensic record, even 60 years later, communicates in the way that forensic records communicate things that language struggles to carry through clinical description that is worse, somehow, than graphic description, because the precision of it refuses the mercies of vagueness. Anya Tulikimäki and Seppo Entiro Boisman were killed inside the tent, stabbed and bludgeoned, the tent fabric around them cut and slashed, the attack conducted through the material in the dark, and then continued after the tent had been opened. The force used was not minimal. The number of wounds was not minimal. This was not an interrupted attack or a panicked one. This was sustained. Mela Ermeli Björklund was found outside the tent, on top of it. She had been partially undressed. She had sustained significantly worse injuries than the others, including wounds inflicted after she was no longer alive. The specific horror of post-mortem violence, what it indicates about the mind of whoever committed it, is not something the forensic record can explain, only document. Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson was found alive. He had a concussion, fractured jaw, fractured facial bones, a deep knife wound to his forehead. He was alive and he was outside the tent, and he had injuries consistent with having been attacked. When investigators asked him what had happened, he said, "There was a figure dressed in black with bright red eyes." He said nothing more that was useful. He maintained for decades that he had no memory of the attack itself, that the last thing he could access before waking injured outside the tent was going to sleep inside it. The figure in black with bright red eyes appeared in his account, and then he could say nothing further. Finland had never experienced anything like this. 3 teenagers were murdered at a campsite, one surviving with injuries he could not explain in any way that led anywhere. The investigation was immediate and extensive, and it was, from the beginning, compromised. By the time investigators arrived, the scene had been visited by curious locals, by birdwatchers who had noticed the damaged tent that morning and investigated, by people drawn to the lake by rumor. The forensic preservation standards of 1960, particularly in a rural location, were not what they are today. Evidence was contaminated before it was collected. Opportunities to trace the attacker's path to and from the campsite were lost in the hours before anyone understood what had happened. One early witness reported seeing a man with blonde hair walking away from the campsite in the early morning. This man was never identified. A man named Hans Östman was brought to the investigators' attention. He had appeared at a Helsinki hospital the day after the attack with blackened fingernails, clothing with red staining that hospital staff believed was blood, and nervous and aggressive in his manner. He was interviewed briefly, provided an alibi, and released. His clothing was never forensically examined. He matched the description of the blonde man walking away from the campsite. He cut his hair shortly after newspaper coverage described that detail. Hans Östman died in 2004 without ever being formally investigated as a suspect. For 44 years, Nils Gustafsson lived a quiet life as a bus driver. He did not speak about Lake Bodom more than required. He carried the night of June 4, 1960, in whatever way survivors carry the worst nights of their lives, forward without resolution, without the thing that would make the wait make sense. Then in March 2004, everything changed. The Finnish National Bureau of Investigation had been working with new forensic technology unavailable in 1960. DNA analysis and blood stain pattern analysis had advanced to the point where the evidence from Lake Bodom could be examined in ways that had not previously been possible. And what the analysis showed, or what the police believed it showed, because this point became bitterly contested, was that certain blood evidence at the scene suggested that Gustafsson had been in positions inconsistent with his account of the attack. The police arrested Nils Gustafsson in March 2004. He was 61 years old. He had been living with the memory of surviving an event that killed his friends for 44 years. And now the Finnish state was saying that he had not survived it, he had committed it. The theory the prosecution developed was this: Gustafsson had experienced an explosive outburst of jealousy targeting his girlfriend, Ermelie Björklund. He had attacked her first with extreme ferocity. The disproportionate severity of her injuries and the post-mortem wounds were explained by the personal nature of his rage. Then he had attacked the others to eliminate witnesses. He had inflicted his own injuries to support the story of an outside attacker. The trial began in August 2005. It lasted 3 months. The prosecution presented its DNA evidence. The defense contested every interpretation. Expert witnesses disagreed about what the blood patterns meant. The forensic evidence that had seemed conclusive in the police investigation became, in the adversarial context of trial, something considerably less than conclusive. Nils Gustafsson was acquitted of all charges. He was awarded €44,900 in damages for wrongful imprisonment and the mental suffering caused by being accused of murdering his friends at the age of 61. The Lake Bodom murders remain officially unsolved. No perpetrator has ever been identified. Hans Östman is dead. The unknown blonde man who walked away from the campsite in the early morning of June 5, 1960 has never been found. Nils Gustafsson is in his 80s and has never provided an account of the night that goes beyond what he said in 1960. A figure in black, bright red eyes, and then nothing. 3 generations of Finnish children were raised being told not to stay out after dark because of Lake Bodom. The shopkeeper Anna Pierce-Joki said it to a journalist covering the 2005 trial. 3 generations. The murder that came to the campsite became a feature of Finnish childhood, a lesson about the dark, a warning that the thing that comes in the night to places that feel safe is real and has never been caught. I want to tell you the thing about this case that stays with me most. It is not the murders themselves, as awful as they are. It is not the forensic ambiguity, or the 44 years before Gustafsson was arrested, or the failed prosecution. It is the figure in black with bright red eyes. Nils Gustafsson said this in 1960. He said it apparently in the state of shock in which he was found, injured, outside the tent, surrounded by the bodies of 3 people he had known. He said it, and then he had nothing else to say. Investigators tried for years to get more details from him. They got nothing more. I think about what the phrase means and what it might have been. It is the description of someone in extreme shock trying to process what they saw in the darkness, the mind reaching for an image when coherence fails. It is perhaps the kind of thing a traumatized brain produces when asked to report on something it has not been able to integrate. A dark figure, eyes that seem to glow or catch the light in a way that the available vocabulary could only describe as red. Or it is the last image before unconsciousness of whatever came to the tent at Lake Bodom, the actual physical reality of whoever was there in those hours before dawn, with a knife and a blunt instrument, and intentions that the forensic record documents in its precise and terrible way. We do not know which. We will never know which. Lake Bodom keeps its secret the way cold water keeps things, thoroughly, without effort, without apology. And somewhere, if the killer was not Gustafsson and was not a man and had never been identified, they lived out the rest of their life with what they knew. And they took it with them. And the lake is still there. And every summer, people camp on its shores.